This afternoon, there'll be a presentation and a time for questions after, so just keep that in mind as we're going through this. This is my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Hardt Zundel, who is trying to retire, but has this heart for these justice issues, which is what brings her here with us this afternoon. She is formerly the pastor of Central United Methodist Church in downtown Detroit, and you'll hear more about that journey in our time together this afternoon. If you need to access restrooms, there is a all-gender bathroom right out the door here, so through the double doors to your right, kind of directly behind where the organ sits. And then if that doesn't work, the bathroom's fine if there's somebody in there. Or you just need to stretch your legs. At the other end of the building, there are men's and women's bathrooms on the balcony level. We also have an all-gender bathroom for your convenience. If at any time you need something or there's any sort of medical or anything, I'll be seated right here. You can get my attention, and I'll be happy to help in whatever way I can. So having said all that, would you welcome with me
So good afternoon. Good afternoon. The first thing I want to clear up is I am not an expert on immigration. I remember being in college and my professor saying what makes you an expert is how far you drove to get here. So 3 hours and 15 minutes does not make me an expert. And either does PowerPoint, and my daughter made this PowerPoint, so we're going to practice it together. First thing I want to talk about is how I got here, how I got to this understanding, and how I became so passionate about this. When I was serving in the local church in the, you want me to hold it?
Sorry, battery's dead.
Okay.
So we need some intermission music. And while Will's doing that, just so we are live streaming this.
Test 1 2.
The mic is so important. Jill's voice carries very well, but we want to make sure our friends following on Facebook are also able to hear what's happening in the room. There we go.
It's coming right at my face. Not move my hands. So when I was early on in my ministry, I was training to be a docent at the Holocaust Center. And one of the things that I had to do was follow the docent around, and one day he was taking a group of businessmen around and explaining the history of the Holocaust. And one of the businessmen raised their hands and said, "Where were the churches when this was going on?" And the docent knew that I was a pastor and looked at me and said, "Well, Jill, where were the churches?" And I didn't have an answer. And so that's always been in the background of my mind, like, if this happened, where would I be? How would I stand? And some of the things that we're seeing today kind of remind me of the Holocaust when you hear words such as mass deportations. That was part of the Holocaust. So that's where this passion came from, that if that ever happened on my watch, where would I stand? Who would I be? And so you'll hear a little bit more about my journey in a minute. This has been sanctuary. The movement of sanctuary has been in all three of the Abrahamic traditions. Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have all welcomed the stranger. have all been a place that offered asylum for those who are fleeing danger. So it's very much at the root of who we are as Christians. Jesus said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Talking about root causes of migration, one of the key factors that drive a lot of Central Americans especially to leave their communities is violence. The countries in the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, continue to be plagued with huge levels of crime and violence, but that's not just there, it's around the world. There's domestic violence, there's lack of economic justice, there's lack of protections from the government. So there's all different kinds of reasons, and the families that I've worked with, I will share with you what their reasons were for fleeing their countries. Why can't we just have them come here legally? I mean, I know you can't see that, but I wanted you to see this is how you do it legally. And it takes years and years and tens of thousands of dollars to come into the country legally. So why is there so much undocumented immigration? There's different reasons. One of them is employment-based immigration. Foreign workers who have job offers from eligible employers can immigrate. There are also investor visas for entrepreneurs who create jobs. Uh-oh. There it is. Refugee asylum. Entering the United States and declaring that you are seeking asylum is a legal way to enter the country, regardless of what you have heard from the White House. You have to go to a checkpoint, and you have to present before a judge. It is then determined if you can move forward with your case, and that case could take years to process. Family-based immigration is, that involves immediate relatives of United States citizens or lawful permanent residents can immigrate, and you have to be sponsored by them. And then the last one is a diversity lottery, also known as a green card lottery. It's a yearly lottery that awards a limited number of immigrant visas to people from countries with low immigration rates to the United States. You must have a high school diploma, and fewer than 1 in 400 applicants ever receive visas. Before we move on to sanctuary and all that, just a few facts. This comes from a book called The Truth About Immigration, which is an apolitical book. But increases in undocumented immigration in any given state has no impact on the rate of violent crimes such as murder, rape, robbery, or assault, nor do they impact property crimes such as burglary, theft, or arson. A synthesis of 51 different studies covering the period between 1994 and 2014 concluded that immigration does not contribute to crime. If anything, it slightly reduces it. This also applies to undocumented immigrants. In the most updated Texas study, which covered the years 2012 to 2018, is that relative to undocumented immigrants, US-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes. That is the fact. Oops. So I want to talk a little bit about how this the sanctuary movement started. It started in 1982 when 6 churches offered to provide sanctuary to Central Americans. The movement was a response to difficult immigration policies that made it hard for Central Americans to get asylum. Churches provided shelter, food, legal advice, and protection to refugees. The movement also raised awareness of the human rights abuses and violence in Central America. It challenged the US-backed violence in Central American countries. In 1990, Congress passed legislation that allowed the president to grant temporary protected status to groups in need. The countries under that protection before Trump were Afghanistan, Burma, Cameroon, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Haiti, and Honduras. And if you just heard the news yesterday, he just took away temporary protective status for Haitians. So what are the current threats? Mass deportations is huge. There's also the Laken Riley Act. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Laken Riley was a young college student who was murdered by an undocumented immigrant here in the United States. So the Laken Riley Act is a United States law just passed that requires the US Department of Homeland Security to detain undocumented immigrants admitting to, charged with, or convicted of theft-related crimes, assaulting a police officer, or a crime that results in death or serious bodily injury like drunk driving. That makes sense, right? If somebody is doing a crime, they should be held. The issue with it is that it requires a no-bond detention solely based on the charge or arrest. There is no due process. So, which means longer detention without bail or a bond hearing. And it risks the prolonged detention of people innocent of the charges. Under this bill, immigration authorities would be required to take a person into immigration custody after a theft-related arrest, even if a criminal judge found that they presented no risk and released them on bail, they would still be detained. The next thing is canceling DACA, Delayed Action of Childhood Arrivals. Taking that away means thousands of children, young adults who have known nothing but the United States would be deported back to their home of origin, which they probably don't even speak the language that is spoken in there. Ending birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment says that if you are born in this country, you are a US citizen. You know that President Trump signed an executive order ending that, but it is in the courts right now. And the last one, and the one I think that we're most concerned about, is no safety for sensitive locations. So in 2011, there was a law passed, an understanding, not a law, an understanding that there are certain locations where ICE could not go in. Hospitals, schools, and places of worship. And that has been taken away now. So I'm going to talk about at Detroit Central. In 2017, we voted to become a sanctuary church. And I wanted to just share with you the stories of the families that we have helped so far. Jeremy, when you did this, when you were preaching, it was so smooth. Oh, there we go. First group, Ded and Flora Ranksbergai from Albania. This is probably the most famous case. It was one of the first cases of sanctuary in the state of Michigan.
To leave my wife to die by herself, and to leave my kids teenager, and to leave and to go back over there, my life, it's for nothing anymore, never see it again.
It's me to stay here in US and just deport my husband. Who is take care of me? My husband, no bad person, no criminal, nothing.
My message to Trump is, yeah, you're going to have to come through me. You're going to have to come through this church if you want this family. because we're going to protect them. We're going to do whatever we need to do to make sure they're safe. So Donald Trump, if you think you or your cronies are going to get through this front door, it's not going to happen.
Youth in church, youth safe. Can nobody do nothing with you? And here it's the God house.
This is the last place that they can be that is safe, supposedly. So other administrations have honored that. I don't know about this administration. So Ded is here and he cannot leave the building until this is all figured out. If ICE comes through the door, they can't search anything unless they have a warrant that's signed by a judge.
I'm from Albania. I come to USA 17 years ago. I come for a better life, like everybody do. And here is just the kitchen, just moving here, you know. No time to put it all together stuff, you know.
Flora has MS. She's too ill to be deported. And then there's Lawrence, who's 24, and he is a DACA recipient. Eric is 15, and he is a citizen. He was born here. DACA is being threatened by the administration right now. Lawrence is terrified too. You know, it's not just Ded that we're fighting for. It's Lawrence too.
That's my wife bed, handicap bed. That's my in here. I got in here. I got the piece of paper for immigration. For 14 years I got in here. Always save it. Oh, that's the tax. Every year I make the taxes, like everyone do. I save it all, everything. I'm working as a cook. I'm working for many years. Service the people, cook. I try to do the best I can.
My dad has already given me the talk about what would happen. I might have to get a part-time job. My brother might have to drop out of school to like pay the bills. I wish people knew that he's actually a really kind and funny person. They always think of him as a really good worker, very experienced, never does a job wrong.
People don't realize, why don't they just become citizens? If you looked at how difficult that is and the amount of money that it costs to do that, you would understand that it's an impossible journey. Legally, I don't think that anything will happen to me. If I go to jail, I go to jail. A family stays together, I can go to jail, that's okay. I said when Trump was elected that I will tear down every brick he tries to build on the southern border. I will shelter people if I need to shelter them. And this is my answer, this is the time. So when Ded came into our church, the lawyer told us it would be a couple of months. 3.5 years later, he was able to get temporary protective status. His case almost went to the Supreme Court. And he has temporary protective status right now, which is also threatened, but he has to check in once a month for the rest of his life with ICE. The next family that we took in is from Cameroon. Pierre Noella Daisy and Owen Mayel from Cameroon. They were with us for a year. They were seeking asylum. He had spoken out against the government and had been beaten with steel rods and had scars all over his legs and his feet. And they were granted asylum, and now they live in Grosse Pointe. This is the current family that lives in the church. They started when I was still serving there. Daouda, Zaadia, and Hassan from Ivory Coast. She is a Christian and he is a Muslim, and his family tried to have her killed. So their court case was supposed to be last Thursday. When they moved in, it was 2022, and I was like, great, you know, we'll have the asylum case, and the lawyer looked at me and said, yep, it's in 2025, and I was like, oh, good God. So it was last Thursday, and last Thursday court was closed because of snow. So we have to wait now till July to see if they will be granted asylum. So let's talk about public sanctuary. There's different ways of doing sanctuary in your church. The first thing, though, before we talk about what is a public sanctuary and what is a private sanctuary, your church needs to have a vote because it's a lot of work. And especially in the climate today, when there's no guarantee that it's a sensitive location. But what happens is the faith community that you are a part of invites a family who has been previously identified to live in the church. What we went through two different agencies. One, Michigan United, identified Dead and Flora for us. So they'd already been vetted. We knew that they were safe to come in. The last two families, I've worked with an immigration attorney who asked me if I could house them and who vouched for them. So once the family moves in, you run a public pressure campaign to demand relief for the family. And so the campaign hopefully helps family, but it helps change politics too. And remember, if you are doing public sanctuary, you are taking on an obligation to house a family. And you are running an advocacy campaign for them at the same time. But don't worry, you can do it. It's just a lot of work. Before I go on to private, public sanctuary, one of the things was that video. We had a ton of media very interested in what we were doing. And it went all around the country. That's part of being public sanctuary, is that you are the face of that, especially the pastor, because the pastor speaks for the church. And so it's a lot of responsibility for the pastor as well. A private sanctuary is when the family moves in, but does not make the case public. They just want to be safe. Private sanctuary is often a step that is taken before taking that campaign public. Because if they're just in the church and nobody knows about it, nothing will change. But it's up to them to make that decision. It's not up to us, it's up to them. But when you make that campaign public, then it puts pressure on the government. Close this case of this sympathetic family, or we're going to go public with the horrible things that you're doing. Especially if you looked at Dead and Flora. There were so many times that I had to take her to the hospital and Dead had to watch from the church. But there was also a time when we were doing a press conference and she had a seizure right in front of everybody. And as horrible as that was, people were seeing, you're trying to deport her caregiver. And so that was a really powerful moment as well. So, housing an immigrant family, an immigrant or an immigrant family. So they need a place to stay from the entrance of the church, far away from the entrance of the church. They have to have access to a shower and kitchen facilities. There is no other church that I know of in the state of Michigan who has a 4-bedroom apartment like Detroit Central does. With a kitchen, it's it works really well. A lot of churches don't have that, but they do. Some churches have showers, some churches have kitchen facilities that they could share. You'll have to go grocery shopping if they can't leave the building. A lot of times you're a listening ear, especially when they're angry at what's being done to them and they want to give up. You're a cheerleader, you're a listening ear. And Gary, my husband, reminded me to save this last one, driving children to school, because he drove Eric to high school a lot of the times. Because while they were living in the church in Detroit, he was going to high school in Southgate. And he didn't he didn't want to move to Detroit. He wanted to stay where his friends were. So we had different volunteers driving them to school.
Why away from the entrance to the church?
Because if ICE is in the parking lot, you don't want them to see them through the window. Great question, though. So once the family is identified, how are you going to figure out where this person is? Once you've announced that you're going to be a sanctuary church, how are you going to find these families? I highly encourage you to use a lawyer or a community group, an advocacy group, and then decide what your criteria is. Is there an imminent threat of deportation? Right now, people who are seeking asylum and have their cases are not under an immediate threat of deportation. But like Ded's case, he was ordered to turn himself in that day when he moved into the church. What's their criminal history? Is it petty theft or is it something more serious? What are you willing to let into your building? Are they willing to go public? That's really important because that's where the pressure comes to get something done. And then if they have a sympathetic story. Definitely Dad and Flora had a sympathetic story. And the church that I served before I went to Detroit Central, extremely conservative. And yet they said, in this case, I agree with what you're doing. So that opens up, a way to have a conversation about, okay, there's more than just this case happening right now. Step 1.5, the decision. So faith leaders and family have clear conversation with each other about expectations. What is the church's responsibility? What is the family's responsibility? And it absolutely must be clear that the family is in charge of decisions regarding entering or leaving sanctuary or any major developments in the campaign. So that's a time for us to check our own privilege. And that's something that we learned with Ded and Flora, because we got $10,000 in one day because of the story. But we meted it out to them instead of giving them that $10,000 up front. And that was humiliating to them. So that was a learning curve for us. Also, there were several times that Dad would call me up and I can't take this anymore, I'm leaving. And I said, you're not under house arrest. You can leave at any time, but you know the threats. So again, that's the listening ear and the support. Step 2, support system activated. There is no way a church can do this by themselves. It's overwhelming. So you need a team that puts together the housing and the needs, but you also need allies. There might be other churches that can't house them, but can certainly do fundraising, or can do the grocery shopping, or can drive the kids to school. So you start to have, if you make the decision to declare yourself a sanctuary church, then you start meeting with those other churches and mosques and temples to say, we're about to do this, can you do it too? And if not, can you help us out? And then the legal team begins to formulate a plan. And there is often no formal way to resolve a case. But immigration law has a lot of discretion. A prosecutor can choose to close many of the cases on their own volition. Not sure how that's going to work now, but they used to. Negotiation. Campaign leaders, allies, and legal team present ICE with an ultimatum: close this case or we go public. In most cases, like I said, do not have a clear legal avenue. So we're generally asking for discretion. How can you work with us to find out the best solution for this? And then step 4, the campaign is launched. Family, congregation, organizations formulate a plan. Allies are activated. Who are the ones that you know that are your local politicians who are on the same side of this? You need to have conversations with them. Are they willing to stand alongside of you at press conferences and protests and that kind of thing? There's a big press conference and a rally. We did that a couple of times to really put pressure on ICE and the administration. We did petitions. We did phone banking. We held vigils. We did a march. And we constantly had them on online and social media. So that people, we started our own Facebook page for them, help keep the Ranks Per Guy family together. And then repeat step 4 until you win.
Yes.
It doesn't always happen in a couple of months. One of the things that I just found out about in the United Methodist Church, there's a thing called a mustard seed migration grant. It's for $2,000. So if you're thinking about doing sanctuary, but you don't have a shower in your church, that could be some seed money that you could do. There's, I know in the Michigan conference, but I can't remember what church just got $2,000 to help refugees from Ukraine be resettled. And then Troy First United Methodist Church used it to do a clothing and pantry for immigrants. So what if you can't house a family or a person in your church? What can you do? Your faith community agrees to help a congregation that's actually hosting a family with logistics and advocacy, coming together to write letters. You know, like I said, driving them, running errands and that kind of thing. And that faith community can also meet with Congress to oppose funding for enforcement. You can help work to get your city to pass a welcoming resolution. You can organize education for your members. That is huge. With all of the disinformation about immigration right now, education is huge. And you can participate in immigration advocacy efforts as well. So I was able to go down with the Board of Church and Society down to the border. That's me in the red. And we're able to also attend a service where all of us pastors got to wash the feet of some of the immigrants that were there that had tethers on their ankles. So that was one of the things that I got to do, to actually say what I saw when I was at the border. There were not people climbing over the fences. There were not people walking in the ocean. They were on the other side, and they saw 300 of us walk up, and they started playing music and singing to us, and it was wonderful. So that's one of the things, if you have an opportunity to actually go down to the border and see what's going on, take up that opportunity. The other thing we did for Dead and Flora is we did a walk to Lansing. So we walked 90 miles, not all in one day. I think it took 6 days. But every night we stopped at a different church and told their story. And they actually got them to FaceTime, and they could talk and tell their story to people as well. So a few legal questions. Are we breaking the law? The definition of harboring depends on who you ask. Several times when I was interviewed, aren't you harboring a fugitive? I said, I'm not harboring a fugitive because ICE knows exactly where he is. I let you know. So, but the new border czar says that anyone harboring an immigrant will be charged with a felony. No congregation or individual has been prosecuted recently. In 1986, Sanctuary Trials indicted 17 movement members. 8 were convicted of smuggling and were given suspended sentences. But it is great publicity. I can't tell you how many new people we got because we were on the screen almost every week with our story. One of the other things that we did is we met with the Wayne County Sheriff and asked him to please not participate by using the local sheriffs or the jail to house immigrants or to arrest them, and we got an agreement with him. We haven't met with the new Wayne County Sheriff, but he said, I don't have enough people to do the job that I'm doing now. I can't do it with, for immigrants as well. So, a little bit about knowing your rights. Everyone has constitutional rights. Everyone, not just U.S. citizens, everyone. Right to due process, right to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures, right to legal counsel, right to remain silent, right to not self-incriminate, right to a jury trial, right to Miranda warnings, right to defend against deportation, and a right for payment for work. The Fourth Amendment, which you might be hearing a lot about, the Fourth Amendment, all people, not just citizens, all people, have a reasonable expectation of privacy. ICE and Customs and Border Patrol are the two agencies under the Department of Homeland Security that arrest people. The rules for immigration agents differ from rules for the police because ICE and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, are both administrative agencies enforcing, wait for it, civil law and not criminal law. So they are different than your local police officer. So what if ICE violates those rights? It can be helpful in an immigration case if there is a record of a violation, which means taking a video or photos. If there are enough violations, it may result in a court telling ICE or CBP that they cannot engage in that behavior anymore. ICE will lie to get consent to try to get into a home, a church, a school. They may say they are the police. They may say they are FBI. And if you open the door to them at a church, at your home, that can be seen as an invitation or consent. ICE can never enter a private place without a judicial warrant. So, this is the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant. I know that you can't see it, but there's a few things. A judicial warrant is signed by a judge. The one on the other side is an administrative warrant, is from Homeland Security to arrest an undocumented immigrant. It is non-binding. It is signed by an agent. Could be the guy next to the cubby that you say, hey, I'm about to go get this guy, can you sign this? It's not signed by a judge. It hasn't been seen by a judge. And it doesn't have to be answered. Civil rights basics. If they say they have a warrant, ask to see the warrant. Do not consent to a search. Never ever present fake documents. Remain silent and record everything. If ICE comes to the church door or to your home, you ask to see that warrant through the window or ask them to slip it underneath the door. Because once you open that door, you've given them a right to enter. When you're thinking about, especially in the church, there are public areas in the church and there are private areas in the church. Offices, Sunday school, where we try to protect our children so we don't let just anybody walk in there. Those are private places. It's very important as we move forward in this, even for people attending worship on Sunday morning, if you have an immigrant in your congregation and somebody from ICE comes in, that you have things labeled private or public. Because if your immigrant has been moved to a private place, no one can go in there unless they have a judicial warrant. So, border zones in our country are 100 miles of the border. So if you live within 100 miles of the border, you are living in a border zone. If you notice, the entire state of Michigan is in the border zone. That means that you can be asked your immigration status at any time. You have to show immigration status, and you may have your car searched without any reason. So rights of places of worship. So think about, like I said, think about the place you worship. Are there private places and public spaces? I would say the sanctuary and fellowship hall are public places. Offices, Sunday school rooms might be private places where only certain people can enter. Without a warrant, ICE and CBP cannot enter those private spaces. So it is very important to mark every door, window clearly with signs what is public and what is a private place. Think about the protocol of what you're going to do if ICE or CBP are here, and how you're going to ask them to leave, because you have the right to ask them to leave. We don't want you to enter our building. I'm not going to let you in. When you ask with kindness and not aggression, because things can escalate quickly. Choose 1 or 2 people in the building that are the ones that are authorized to give consent for ICE or CBP to enter in the building. One of the things that Central has now on their door, and my daughter's old church in Boston has, it has a sign right on the door that says, ICE and Homeland Security cannot enter this building without a warrant signed by a judge. And then underneath that, they have a QR code that goes right to Know Your Rights for the ACLU. Protecting congregants. If you have an undocumented congregant, it is so important to have a plan. And whatever that plan is, you need to communicate it clearly with all the employees and your congregation. Designate one person to review any warrants. And what I had some training just recently, and the lawyer said, you could just go, I'm sorry, I just don't understand this. I think you're going to need to come back another time. Employees should advise congregants of their right to remain silent and to request an attorney. Employees should never lie about the whereabouts of the congregant, because that can carry criminal penalties. So here's a sample ICE safety plan. Never give consent to enter. Advise ICE, I'm just following protocol. This is the rules. And then contact the designated person who is supposed to respond to the officer. Building administration, immediately place the congregants on notice that ICE is in the building. If you are having worship and ICE is at the door, you need to let the people in the church know that. And notify ICE that you can't answer questions about specific congregants without a judicial warrant. There was one time when Dad and Flora were still living at Central that we were hearing that the police were going to be coming into, that ICE was going to be coming into churches. So I told my building superintendent, if ICE comes into the building, I need you to interrupt me in worship. Let me know right away. So I'm in the middle of preaching and I hear, Reverend Jill, and I turned around and he said, ICE is in the building. So I just looked out at the congregation. I said, you need to start to pray. I walked out into the lobby. It was the Detroit police looking for somebody else. And I said, you're not ICE? And he said, no. And I said, I walked back into the sanctuary. The entire congregation had gotten up and surrounded Dad and Flora. So that was pretty amazing, and then I was trying to calm down the rest of the worship service. Other things to think about. If you have an immigrant family or a mixed status family, and they drop their kids off at the nursery, and ICE comes and arrests them while they're in the nursery. Do you have forms that say, if this happens, this is who you call? Because if you don't, that family, those children could end up in foster care. So there needs to be that. If you're working with immigrants, make sure that there's powers of attorney, delegation of temporary guardianship. The family that lives there now has a little boy, Hassan, who's adorable. And we had to have that conversation just recently. If you're detained, what happens to Hassan? And they've adopted me as grandma and said, well, you'll take him. And I went, no, I'm too old. I am way too old. So we had that conversation. And also, Dauda has a work permit, but he just carries his driver's license. I said, nope, you need to have that work permit on you all the time. I just got a call yesterday or the day before from somebody south of Detroit who has a friend who's a chef who just had 5 people arrested and detained. And some of them had work permits, but they didn't have them on them. So they're in detention now. Talk to immigrants and families about where's the safe place for your documents, so that if you are detained, how can I find them? So those are all kind of things to be thinking about. Another thing that I didn't mention is if you are live streaming your service and you have immigrants in your congregation, when communion comes, get that camera off the crowd, because ICE and CBP are watching live streams and they're looking for people. So as crazy as that is, that was something I hadn't even thought about, is that if you have people on the screen as they're coming forward, somebody else could be watching them. Okay, on that happy note, do we have questions?
Yeah, hi, my name is George Nagel, and I have, one of my sons lives in Denver, Colorado, and the only time he ever went to church is when I took him. And so it's been a long time, and he and his wife are not affiliated with the church. And it's my grandson, so I'll get to the point. He has a second home in his property, and he had, I believe, a sanctuary family in his home for nearly 3 months. I'm assuming that's the case, okay? Could that be the case? This is Colorado, it's in the Denver area. I suspect it's through my ex's church, I'm not sure. Does that kind of thing occur?
We're working with the conference attorney right now. If it's private property and not connected to the church, that does not count as sanctuary. It doesn't count as a sensitive location. But we were trying to figure out, hey, we've got all these camps. Can we use a camp? If you have a second parsonage, can we use that? We don't have the answer for that yet. But if you are housing somebody in a private home, you don't have the protection.
Well, he did that for 3 months, and that kind of thing has some appeal to me versus like doing it in the church. It also is appealing to me too because it separates it from the politics and the advocacy. And I think mixing the two together is problematic, at least for me. But I do like the idea of providing the sanctuary, providing a home, a safe place, the shopping. And they were in a very safe community next door. Regis, a nice college, you know, town kind of thing. So then you don't have to address a lot of those issues like is ICE looking at the service and kind of thing. And just overall the way you framed it, you know, it's kind of a fear-based kind of a scenario. And so I have kind of a problem with that too. You know, thinking people are spying on us and looking through our windows. I mean, that's a horrible way to live one's life. You know? Yeah.
And they'll put up with that if it's made even worse where they came from.
Yeah.
If the city, if it's, let's say the city of Big Rapids declared itself a sanctuary city, would a private residence within the city limits then be able to be considered a sanctuary?
I don't think so. When you make yourself a sanctuary city, that means that your local police will not participate in any of the raids or that kind of thing. And also now you'll be losing all federal funding if you declare yourself a sanctuary city, but East Lansing just did that, so. Paul?
You know, it's hard to keep track of all the announcements that are coming out of there, but has ICE actually gone into a church yet, given the current administration's attitude towards what we're hearing?
I don't personally know.
I've seen reports of them actually, not during worship services, but at other events
Going into churches.
and schools.
Yeah, definitely schools. I have a friend who has a Hispanic ministry in Melvindale, and they do a food pantry, and folks that are lined up for the food pantry had ICE walk through and ask for their papers. So, and then the kids in Southwest Detroit don't want to go to school anymore because they're afraid that if they go to school, their parents won't be there when they get home. And the last time Trump was in office, they were physically cutting themselves because the stress was just too much. There was one time I had to actually sneak dead into the hospital to be seen. And that was terrifying for me because I'm like, I'm outside of the church, he's in my car, oh my God, I'm a felon. So nothing happened, and we got back to the church, but I didn't sleep the night before, and I was all worried about that, but.
But you can still run for president
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about law enforcement's use of code enforcement as leverage. About 12 years ago, this church agreed to open its doors to the homeless and shelter them at night in the wintertime. It was months of the planning. We included city management and law enforcement in the planning process, but when it became apparent we were going to be successful in launching this, the fire chief and the police chief came in and lined about $70,000 worth of improvements that would have to be made.
Mm-hmm.
The question was asked, so if we were to have, say, 50 people here for 4 or 5 days for a retreat, we wouldn't be able to do that. The answer was, yes, of course you could.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't have one homeless person here overnight, and if we did, they threatened to come in and arrest everybody. So my question is, what was the status of this 4-bedroom apartment before you decided to become a sanctuary church?
Great question. That was the building superintendent's residence. And he left, and we made it actually, we put bunk beds in it for mission teams to come to Detroit. That's awesome. And then Ded and Flora moved in, and the rest is history, but it was already there. Yes?
So I think it sounds very important that, you know, I would think that ICE could easily say, I have a warrant.
Mm-hmm.
But are people being informed it has to be a judicial warrant? Because if they just say that and somebody sees the word warrant, they may make an error and let them in.
Right, and so that's where the education part comes in, to know what you're looking for. It needs to say United States Circuit Court or something like that on top, and it needs to be signed by a judge.
I just hope every superintendent, every school district, every teacher knows that.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to get lots of people to know that, and there's lots of Know Your Rights seminars and that kind of thing, but that's such a huge, huge important part.
Yes.
Okay, I have one thing more to share. When we were walking to Lansing, there was an 82-year-old man walking with us who was a Holocaust survivor. And he just passed away recently. But he would walk against the traffic in the street with a sign that said, "Keep families together." And he was 2 years old when he went into hiding. A family in Paris took him in. And he was there for 5 years. And his mother came back and came to get him. And she only spoke Yiddish, and he only spoke French because he grew up in France. He was an amazing man, and just recently at 87 laid down in the street to protest the Gaza war. So this is the kind of man that he was. But they read this poem at his service, and doing sanctuary is exhausting. Doing immigration is exhausting, and you know, I was so appreciated today about self-care, because that's a huge part of this, because it can get overwhelming. But this is called, and I have a slide for that. This is called active hope, but that's the key word. Active hope is not waiting to be rescued by the Lone Ranger or some other savior. This hope is waking up to the beauty of life on whose behalf we can act. We belong to this world. The web of life is calling us forth at this time. We've come a long way and are here to play our part. With this hope, we realize that there are adventures in store, strengths to discover, and others to link arms with. This hope is a readiness to engage and make connections, a readiness to discover our steadiness of purpose, our own authority, the liveliness of our curiosity, the unsuspected depth of our patience and diligence, and our capacity to lead. These are heavy days, and none of this can be discovered without risk. We may not know how our actions unfold, the impact they might have. Sometimes the only thing we can do is to do all that we can. But we do need to step outside of the room where everything is known. And we do need to hold each other. Everything is impossible. Everything is impossible until it isn't. Thank you.
Thank you.